What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for tonight's Monday Night Football single game showdown slate. Kansas City Chiefs, Philadelphia Eagles. Another potentially great showdown game. I don't want to jinx it like I did the Ravens and Bengals game on Thursday, but hopefully we get a good one tonight. Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. What we're going to do in this video, 15, 20 minutes long, break down the injuries that impact the slate. There's one major one for sure that will impact how we build our lineups. We'll talk about low-risk lineup construction tips, talk about some core plays that are going to be very popular that you should consider for 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads, and is the core of your high-risk lineups. And then we'll talk about high-risk lineup construction tips for the biggest GPPs, satellites, leagues, exponential payouts. That's why you're here, to win the big bucks. So we'll talk about strategies for that as well. All right, we'll start with the injuries, and we'll start in the Philadelphia side, and we'll start with Dallas Goedert, who had the forearm fracture, elbow fracture, I believe it was a forearm fracture, in the last game. They had a bye week. They actually didn't put him on injured reserve. They think he can return sooner than the 4 weeks, especially with the bye week. Either way, he is not going to play tonight. So that certainly opens up a lot of their offense behind A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, as we've seen 5 to 9 targets usually per game for Dallas Goedert. So behind him on the depth chart, let's just look at those guys first. Scroll down. We have Jack Stoll, $3,200, expected to be the primary guy who takes over Dallas Goedert snaps. Not a pass catching savant by any means. We also have Grant Calcaterra, who we've played in preseason DFS some. We saw him last year when Dallas Goedert went down, catch a couple long passes. He's the min price at $200. He won't play as much as Stoll, more than likely. They also have Albert O, who they signed off of. Actually, they picked up after Denver got rid of him. If you're a Dynasty fan, preseason DFS fan, hell, a best ball fan, you probably have heard of Albert O and his college prowess in the receiving game. But we really don't know. This is more of a wish than anything that he gets action on the field tonight. But all three of these guys are probably going to make sense. However, what stood out to me was the coaching comments from their head coach, Nick Sirianni. They asked him in a press conference, how are you guys going to deal with the loss of Dallas Goedert? He obviously said it's going to be tough. He's a great player. We can't necessarily replace him. But what stood out to me was he said, we can't just replace him with our tight ends. Normally, a coach will say, yeah, we got a great group behind them. They'll piece together, they'll work it out, and we'll try to replace Dallas Goedert. He didn't say that about Jack Stoll or Grant Calcaterra or Albert O. He said, we'll use our other positional groups to help fill that void. Brian Windhorst meme. What does that mean? What is he talking about? So it could be more 2 running back sets. I don't think that'll be the case. What I think is actually going to happen, based on last year when Dallas Goedert missed 4 weeks, is they will rely on their wide receiver threes more 3 wide receiver sets, more passes and targets to the wide receiver threes. I say threes, plural, because we have Olamide Zaccheaus, the tax collector, at $1,200, and we have Julio Jones, signed a few weeks ago to Philadelphia. In their last game, they had a bye last week. In their previous game, Zaccheaus ran 17 routes, Julio Jones ran 13 routes. Both of those numbers should tick up tonight. Maybe it flips, not sure. Either way, Quez Watkins is on IR. But we will see these 2 guys, Julio Jones, Olamide Zaccheaus, get an increase in snaps and likely targets. And if we just look back to what happened when Goddard was out last year, we saw a similar phenomenon. Both Calcaterra and Stoll combined for 11 catches in 4 games, right? I understand that they're cheap, especially Calcaterra, but it's not like we can expect some crazy target volume for their backups like we would on some other teams. In Goddard's absence last year, Quez Watkins, then their wide receiver 3, went off. Had 2 of his 3 touchdowns for the year during that stretch. Had, I want to say, over 300 receiving yards during that stretch. Maybe over 200 receiving yards. Either way, it was their wide receiver 3, and that's maybe what Sirianni is referring to. So this is all a long-winded way of saying, yes, Stoll will probably be popular, and Calcaterra will pick up some ownership as well. But I truly believe, and I don't think ownership is following as of our projected ownership this morning, Julio Jones and Olamide Zaccheaus are probably the biggest beneficiaries behind the Dallas Goedert injury. All right. All that being said, the other situation to monitor, and I don't think it'll matter that much ultimately, is Richie James. We were drafting him a ton in best ball this year. He is the min price. He was activated off injured reserve on Saturday. But there's some weird vibes around this one where he was activated. They asked Andy Reid about him on Saturday, and he said, I don't think he'll be activated. That's up to the GM and the front office and whatnot. I guess they were trying to trade Richie James before the trade deadline. He wasn't happy with his role or like maybe his injury recovery. I'm not really sure. Don't want to get into it. Either way, it doesn't sound like he'll be active tonight despite being activated from the injured reserve. And if he is, it's not like he saw a bunch of snaps or a bunch of targets in the first couple of weeks. Let's just monitor, right? If he is on the active list, 650 tonight, sure, you can throw him into your 150 player pool. Other than that, I don't think he's going to impact the game too much. So, all right, now let's talk about low risk lineup construction tips. Again, these are 50-50s, double ups, head to heads. Just have to beat half the field to double your money. And this slate tonight is a lot different than our typical showdown slate, and we likely have to veer away from our typical showdown strategy for low risk contests, where we try to lock up both quarterbacks, both running backs. That presents a couple problems for tonight's slate. One, both these teams do split their backfield some. So while, let's bring up both teams here. DeAndre Swift, $8,400 in the flex. And if we go over to FanDuel, he is $13K. Now, he's basically out-snapping Kenneth Gainwell 2-1 at this rate, but that's not a workhorse workload by any means. So that certainly presents a lower floor than we would like for our low-risk contest. And then Pacheco is still getting the bulk of the snaps here, but we do have the Eagles' #1 ranked rush defense against fantasy running backs. We also have the presence of Jerick McKinnon, but he is pretty cheap. If we had to pick between the two, I would likely go with Pacheco in the $1,200 savings and the $1,500 savings. Sorry, $2,000 savings on FanDuel. But if we're playing both quarterbacks and both running backs, and let's just put them into the lineup just to see what it looks like. Mahomes, Hurts, DeAndre Swift, Pacheco. We talked about some cheap guys already. There's another cheap one we'll discuss here in a second that can make this work. But it also means you're leaving out A.J. Brown in his basically 125 receiving yards per game. You're also leaving out Travis Kelce in this great matchup and basically the only guy with a heartbeat in their passing game. That makes it tough if you have to fade those guys. Now, understand that you are fading them and you're saving $3,000 to $4,000 when you're fading them, and that's how it'll work in low risk contests. This is a really intricate way of saying low risk contests are extremely difficult tonight. You have to decide, first of all, which quarterback you captain or MVP on FanDuel. That's a coin flip that you may or may not lose. You have to decide between the running backs if you're going to play them. You probably have to fade A.J. Brown and Travis Kelce. You certainly have to do so on FanDuel. So it's really tough. Low risk contests, I would avoid tonight. I would say all of my allocation that you're planning on playing tonight, spread it out in your high risk contest satellites. Low risk is really, really tough tonight. And despite the value that we do have on DraftKings, there are too many decisions you have to make to feel comfortable about making a low risk lineup. So the guys that you would consider are the running backs and the quarterbacks, A.J. Brown and Travis Kelce. And then probably based on ownership alone, and this is another reason, it would be Jack Stoll, who we have as one of the more popular guys in the sub kicker defense range. I already mentioned we like the wide receiver threes for Philly instead. But you also have Justin Watson, who we expect to eclipse 20% ownership in most contest types and probably much higher in smaller GPPs and in low-risk contests. But he's priced at $2,400 despite running the most routes for Kansas City in their last game. That's going to fluctuate. They change up their wide receiver patterns all the time. But we still expect him to run 15 to 25, 30 routes, deep balls. And again, not scoring a ton of points while he's doing it. But if you get 5 to 6 points from a guy who's $2,400 in a smaller GPP, that is extremely helpful. And you don't need to be perfect in those smaller contests and those low-risk contests. So Watson, especially on DraftKings is in consideration for your low-risk contests and as your core plays. All right, now let's talk about high-risk contests, leagues, GPP, satellites. That's where it gets extremely interesting tonight. Now, I got some in-person feedback this weekend about me drinking water during these videos and these shows. And I believe the terminology was obnoxious. So I am doing my best. I gotta hydrate. I will lift the mic. You guys let me know. I'm sure others feel the same way. I'll do my best to eliminate any byproduct, any sound byproduct of me drinking during the shows. I'll do my best. All right, let's talk about these high risk contests now. And let's talk about the cheap guys first. And this applies to both FanDuel and DraftKings, guys you would consider as differentiators, salary savers in your lineups. All right, if we start below the kicker and defense range. Well, I guess let's start below the kicker range, right? Because we have Kenneth Gainwell going to play 20 snaps or so. And we also have, in addition to Gainwell, Jerick McKinnon. Now, this is above the kicker range, which I immediately decided against talking about. But both of these guys are going to be under 20%, maybe under 10% in some contests. But McKinnon and Gainwell, great pivots and great leverage away from some of the guys in this range, and even if you're fading the running backs on their respective teams. Now, if you remember that Thursday night game, where unfortunately Mark Andrews went down. I talked about the mid-range being extremely important as differentiation, and Odell Beckham ended up in the optimal lineup. I don't necessarily think that is the case here where we have to play one of these guys to get different, but it is an option if you want to consider McKinnon, who could play more snaps in a trailing game script against a good team, or Gainwell, who just also hurry up offense potentially could get some more work as well. Kadarius Toney is not playing more than 10 snaps per game right now, not running more than 10 routes. So he is still extremely overpriced. We don't expect him to get over 10%, maybe even not even 5%. But that is a leap of faith at best to hope that Toney, after a bye week, gets more work in this passing game. Sky Moore, his snaps and routes have bounced around anywhere from 10 to 30. But when he's been on the field for the past year and a half in his NFL career, has just not commanded targets. Drawing targets is a skill. Maybe you play him in your 150 set, but not a guy that we're considering as a true differentiator in our lineups, a guy that we have to get in. Just mix him in as your low-owned piece. Talked about Jack Stoll. I think he'll be overvalued and over-owned relative to his historical production and the coach's comments. Same for Grant Calcaterra. MVS, out there getting his cardio in, running 20-plus routes per game, at least run some deep routes, has a chance to blow up the slate at 3K. Is it likely? No. I mean, if you've played Showdown all season, you've felt the pain during the Kansas City slates. We've talked about differentiating, playing all the low-owned Kansas City wide receivers. They never do anything. They've done something on main slates, but it's extremely painful just to watch these guys out there getting their cardio in and not producing. MVS falls in that same category tonight. It is up to you to decide if you want to feel that pain and consider playing him at sub 20% ownership. Mecole Hardman, they traded for from the Jets, who just decided not to use him after paying him money, which is really weird. But he's back in Kansas City. He's also mixing in. Maybe he gets more work after the bye week. Not that he necessarily needs it since he already knew the offense. But again, just a guy that we can mix in. These are all wide receiver fours that are playing wide receiver 2 through 7 snaps for Kansas City. It is a dice roll. But these are the types of guys you mix into your MME sets, right? Your 20 max, your 150 max. Not necessarily guys you target if you're hand building or you're playing small field GPPs. Justin Watson is a guy we talked about already. We mentioned both Zacchaeus and Julio Jones as our preferred options of this group that we expect both to be under 20%. Really the guys I'm targeting in that range. CEH will mix in as their running back 3. Don't expect much more than a handful of touches for him. Noah Gray running more routes as well as they transition to a little more 2 tight end sets. And we see his targets be relatively stable and not putting up much different numbers than Justin Watson at $600 more. Obvious difference here, Justin Watson's running routes deep down the field, has the potential to put up a 15-point game, whereas Noah Gray can't put up that type of performance outside of, and I'm not going to say it based on how I basically killed Mark Andrews on Thursday, but Gray doesn't have the ceiling that Watson has, but for smaller contests, certainly has the floor that Watson provides if you need the extra $600. Anybody else we need to talk about down here? Let's keep scrolling. Albert O, we've talked about. I think that's it. So let's just make sure we get to the bottom. Yeah, that's it. So lots of options. None in particular are that appealing outside of the 2 cheapest playable Kansas City passing game targets in Justin Watson and Noah Gray. And then our favorites, just to repeat, Julio Jones and Olamide Zacchaeus. If I had to choose between the 2, I would pick Zacchaeus, who's been running more routes. It probably isn't dust like Julio Jones is, but both guys are in play for sure. All right, other options, other angles to consider for tonight's showdown slate. Just pulling up my notes here. The defenses we have to consider. Maybe one of them gets over 20% ownership. We'll see, just due to the mid-range being kind of unappealing. But anytime there's a high total game, defenses generally are lower owns, which is backwards thinking. Higher scoring game, more opportunities for dropbacks, more opportunities for turnovers. And generally, at lower ownership in these high total games, you can win $1 million doing it. I'm just saying, speaking from experience there. Low-owned defenses in high-powered offenses, teams that are going to pass the ball, really when you want to play those types of defenses. We love both the Eagles and Chiefs defenses. Even in all contest types tonight, it may feel really gross to play it in a smaller GPP, but even if they score 3-4 points, that is not going to kill you at their price. Obviously, you need much more in the larger contests, but smaller contests, you can play them. And even if they score just a couple of points, you are still live for definitely cashing and even winning some GPPs, depending on how the guys around them do. And finally, we should discuss the captain and MVP strategy for tonight for both sites. The defense strategy I just discussed, that applies to FanDuel as well, if not even more so, because they're going to be lower owned with only 5 roster spots. So we expect ownership to be pretty spread out on DraftKings. Mahomes, Hurts, A.J. Brown, Kelsey, and then the secondary guys mixing in and getting some more as well. On FanDuel, we expect it to be much more top heavy with Mahomes and Hurts. So I think the way I would approach it, the way you have to think about it tonight, when we have popular MVPs, and if you've been watching our videos, you probably know this by now, but how many low-owned differentiators can we play in the flex? How big is that pool if we want to go in and play heavy of the popular MVPs? Tonight, obviously, we have a ton, right? If you play Mahomes at MVP, you have all their shitty pass catchers to pick from. You have Noah Gray, you have Jerick McKinnon, tons of options. Plus the Philadelphia guys can differentiate as well. If you play Hurts, the same thing goes. You have the tight ends. They won't be nearly as popular on FanDuel due to the pricing in the scoring system. You have their wide receiver threes. So if you want to play all in Mahomes and Hurts, you can certainly do it tonight. So that is one option. Go all in on either one guy or maybe 50-50 or 60-40, however you want to allocate that. You can certainly do it. I think I'd like it more on DraftKings tonight, and I know that feels weird to say because they're going to be lower owned. If you can get Mahomes and Hurts under 20%, when historically they're going to be over 20% in a showdown slate. Now, they may eclipse that tonight. Maybe they get up to 20-25%. Either way, we normally see Hurts above that. I think if I was 150 maxing tonight, I would go all in on Mahomes and Hurts and just rotate all those low-owned guys in. On FanDuel, when we get guys like A.J. Brown and Travis Kelsey and DeAndre Swift and Devonta Smith and Isaiah Pacheco at sub 10%, probably sub 15%, maybe in A.J. Brown and Kelsey's case, but we get those guys who can put up multi-touchdown performances at sub 20% MVP, I would prefer to go all in on those guys. I know Jack's been having success doing this, almost had the 65K hit the other day. Jack is our lineup builder architect for those who are unaware. He'll be on, by the way, he'll be on our Wednesday stream. We're doing a live stream probably Wednesday evening for the Thanksgiving 3-game slate. If you've been around, you know, but if you're unfamiliar, Jack crushes the smaller slates. He's going to come on here with me, and we're going to break down the 3-gamer for Thanksgiving. All the short slate strategies you need, all of our player takes, make sure you tune in for that. Just subscribe. If you're not already, you'll get notified when we go live or when that video is posted. Either way, A.J. Brown, Kelsey, Swift, Devonta, Pacheco, I would prefer to play those guys on FanDuel, which seems backwards given the scoring system for larger GPPs. Smaller GPPs, you just pick between Hurts and Mahomes and just play the quarterback and get the safe points. But for larger GPPs, 150 max and 20 maxing, I think, and this is my strategy, and you can play it how you want. I'm just presenting the options. I think I would go heavy on the skill position players while playing the quarterbacks heavy on DraftKings. But I would not fault you, and it may even be the right way to flip that, or just go all in on these guys on both sides. I think it's very possible, very likely, and it's up to you to decide how you want to do that. Now, our daily plug will give out more information later today. If you're watching this in the afternoon, it is likely already posted with player rankings for both sites for all contest types, with overall slate notes, more in-depth data and angles to consider, and then lineup construction tips for 6 different contest types for DraftKings and FanDuel. Basically, a complete roadmap to the slate, goes more in depth. And it's if you're not an auditory learner, you're more visual, you like to read and consume, check out the daily plug this afternoon on OccupyFantasy.com. The link is in the description below. All right, I think that'll do it for the video. We got through it with just one drink, one sip. And again, let me know your feedback about how I did in that department. And if you have any questions about tonight's slate, go ahead and comment on the video. I'll monitor the channel throughout the day. Just drop a comment, question below. If you have opinions, predictions, we always love to hear that. Some of you are very opinionated, and we love seeing that too. So drop a comment below. Let us know how you feel about tonight's slate, and give us a thumbs up to show support for the channel. All right, I think that'll do it. OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get more information. A lot of you just watch the free videos, and we get that. But if you want the extra edge, you want every piece of information, every tool you possibly need to get the edge in your contest, check out OccupyFantasy.com for tonight's game. Brian Jester for Occupy. Thanks, and good luck tonight.